Welcome to Lecture 15, Medieval and Gothic Art. The 1,000 years that followed the fall of the Western Roman Empire are called the Middle Ages. Some people used to think of this as a holding period between the era of classical Rome and the rebirth of classical art and culture during the Renaissance. So there used to be these negative associations with this time period, and it was often called the Dark Ages. However, that is just because we didn't have a ton of information about what was happening, but there was a lot happening. This negative attitude has shifted as awareness and knowledge of the era's contributions to religion, economics, architecture, art, and culture has increased. In this lecture, we will look at early medieval, Romanesque, and Gothic art and cultural objects. As Rome's power declined, non-Roman people groups such as the Franks, the Goths, and the Vikings, nomadic groups that the Greeks had once called barbarians, gained control of parts of Europe, and it was really chaotic politically at this time period. But we do see these people's influence in the art of Europe at the time. So they often had these small carvings and metalwork with really complex interlacing geometric motifs. And so we see this showing up in Christian art. The political situation in Western Europe had been really chaotic since the fall of Rome. And it remained so until Charlemagne unified Western Europe again in 800. He became what was called the Holy Roman Emperor and was crowned by the Pope and brought political stability to the region. What you see here are two pages from an illuminated manuscript. An illuminated manuscript is a handwritten book that has been highly decorated with gold, silver, and elaborate designs. Manuscript actually means handwritten, and remember, before the printing press was invented, people had to handwrite and copy books. This book, the Lindisfarne Gospels, contains the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, of the Bible. It's called the Lindisfarne Gospels and comes from medieval England. And what you see is the carpet page, and then the first page of the Gospel of Matthew. So a carpet page is just a highly decorated cover page. There's a carpet page or cover page before each of the four Gospels in an illuminated manuscript. Carpet pages are typically highly decorated with geometric designs. They're called carpet pages because they resemble textiles like carpet. Some scholars believe they may represent prayer mats. So what's depicted in this carpet page is a stylized cross. It's inscribed with these meandering, multicolored designs. If you look closer, the designs are actually intertwined snakes devouring themselves. And this kind of fantastical animal imagery is what I was talking about, the stylized forms that were derived from non-Roman people groups that had conquered parts of Europe at the time. Most illuminated manuscripts were done by a team of people, but the Lindisfarne Gospels are unique. They were all done, the whole thing was written and decorated by one monk at the Lindisfarne Priory, a religious community. The monks would have lived in a monastery, and monasteries at the time were real places of knowledge. Monks were educated. They could read and write. They made copies of the Bible, but also copies of classical philosophical texts and treatises on math and medicine. This monk's artistic skill is especially evident in the carpet pages. So we see the stylized cross on the left, and then the right is actually the first page of the Gospel of Matthew. And so it was really typical that they would highly stylize the first letter of the first page. And you can see that design is really highly stylized. These illuminated manuscripts would have been written in Latin. And remember, Christianity first came to Britain actually by Christian Romans. But then all these invasions by non-Christian Saxon, Anglos, and Vikings drove Christianity to the fringes of the British Isles. Around 600, St. Augustine arrived from Rome to convert the British pagans. And so we really get a mix here of those non-Christian geometric designs, and then also obviously Christian content. The Lindisfarne Gospels really helped to define a British Christian style, which would have been a combination of Christian content and then these non-Christian stylized designs. The Romanesque period is around the 1000s. At this time, there was a huge church building boom. There was finally some political stability and economic prosperity, and so they needed all of these churches to house the increased population. The churches during this period adopted the Roman basilica style, so a long rectangular central nave, and then we get rounded arches. Remember, Romanesque has the word Roman in it, and the Romans love their rounded arches. Churches at this time were largely built in stone with those rounded arches, barrel vaults, and really thick walls. So the problem with Romanesque architecture is that there's not a lot of space for windows. There's not a lot of light. One of the reasons that they were having such a large church boom too is because people were becoming obsessed with making pilgrimages. And so they wanted to go to these different churches to see, to go visit what the churches had to offer. At the time, there was a real goal on salvation. So salvation and the afterlife were a big preoccupation of the Middle Ages. This is the Church of Saint-Sernin in Toulouse, France, in southern France. And it really represents all the requirements for a Romanesque style cathedral. Okay, so as I mentioned, there is a pilgrimage fever at the time. A pilgrim is someone that travels for religious reasons. Pilgrims traveled all over Europe to visit churches that held sacred relics, say the bones of a saint. Churches had to be built bigger to accommodate all of these visitors. I'm talking hundreds and thousands of pilgrims. They wanted to go to these churches to visit the relics and shrines, but the churches also had to be big enough to, have regular mass. So we're looking at Saint-Sernin in an aerial view here from above and behind. So we can see this long central aisle, which is the nave. So the nave is just the long central rectangular aisle in a church. That part has a higher ceiling, as you can see from the aerial view, and then on the sides, there's side aisles too. Note too that Romanesque churches were usually in a cross shape. Right where the two sides meet to make the cross is a large spire. In the back of the church, you'll see all these small domes. So these are the ceilings of 5 radiating chapels. So the relics would be placed here in the back of the church so that the pilgrims wouldn't disturb the regular service. So the pilgrims would go down the side aisles to the radiant chapels to view and pray at the relics. In the Romanesque time, there's a shift from flat wooden ceilings, like in Old St. Peter's, to stone ceilings. Why? Stone is much less vulnerable to fire, which was a major problem. The ceiling here is in a style that's called a barrel vault that you can see in the interior photo. A barrel vault is an architectural ceiling element. It is a continuous arched shape, and it's formed by a series of arches. So it's a semicircular barrel punctuated by arches that spring from columns in the nave. The massive weight of that stone vault is supported by really thick nave and aisle walls. The high barrel vault creates lots of space for worshipers. But there's little light in these churches because you need strong, solid walls to hold up the heavy stone ceiling, so they don't punctuate them with many windows. During the Romanesque time, there's really not a lot of freestanding sculpture. Rather, most sculptural decoration is attached to architectural elements. So here you see 2 examples of Romanesque sculpture on what's called the tympanum. The tympanum is just the semicircular space above the door to a cathedral. So you would see these sculptures when you walk in and out, so they're really important. We're going to focus on the weighing of the souls of the Last Judgment, but I included another tympanum scene so you could see the similarities, what was typical of these. So It would usually be a scene depicting the afterlife, so the saved and the damned. So in both, you see Jesus at the center, his arms are outstretched, the damned are on his left, and the saved are on his right. In both, depicting humans naturalistically is not really a concern. These look a lot different than those idealized Greek sculptures, for example. Artists are not looking at real bodies for inspiration during this time. Rather, they're looking at other art. And so the figures kind of look like dolls or marionettes. Let's focus in on the tympanum from the Cathedral of Saint-Lazare, though, in France. This church was also a major site for pilgrims, and so all the pilgrims would have seen this scene as they walked into the church. It's actually meant to be a quite terrifying scene. So Jesus sits at the center on a throne. You can see 4 figures that surround him. Those are 4 angels. There's hierarchical scale going on here. Remember, where the most important figure is the largest, and indeed Jesus is the largest figure and the most important. On his left, our right, are the damned. They're going to hell. You can see Saint Michael next to him, and he's weighing souls, and he's surrounded by demons who are trying to grab the souls from him. On Jesus's right and our left, there are those that are going to heaven, and you can see there's like some nice architecture in heaven. There's some rounded arches and Mary and other holy figures.